Hey guys, and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon and I just saw Toy Story 4. Now before I get into the review of that, real quick I want to recap the original trilogy just so you know where I'm coming from with this. I am a huge fan of the original Toy Stories, especially the second one. It's a slightly unpopular opinion, but the second one's actually my favorite one. I think they're all great though, and I thought that the ending of the third one was a perfect ending for the trilogy, and I was done and didn't want any more. So when the fourth one was originally announced, I was honestly disappointed. I thought that they were going to ruin it. I was very skeptical when the trailer came out, thought it looked pretty bad, and didn't want anything to do with this movie. But despite that, wanted to see it and couldn't not see it just because, I don't know, it's Toy Story, you know, like you just have to see it anyway. So that's where I was coming from with this. And having said that, I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I might. Now, I will also say, this is the first Toy Story movie to not have a perfect rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's right to beat that. It's not perfect, and it's not as good as the other ones. That doesn't, however, mean that it's not good. It's just the worst of the four. Now, these four movies are all really good, so to be the worst one doesn't necessarily mean that much, but there are definitely some nitpicks about this movie that I could pick out, whereas the other ones honestly are so perfect that I don't know that I could point out anything wrong with them, especially the first two. The third one is, I think, a slight drop off in quality. I know that's not a common opinion, but regardless, I think that all of those are really good, and this one, I think everybody could agree, is not quite up to that level. Now, if this was just some independent animated film and wasn't related to Toy Story, I might not be as harsh on it, but because it's part of that Toy Story brand and part of that umbrella, part of that franchise, I think myself and everyone is going to be a lot more critical because this movie seemed to come out of nowhere, seemed unnecessary, and we don't want it to ruin our perfect little trilogy. It's got a perfect little story, it had a perfect little ending. Why would we make another one unless it's absolutely perfect? So I think a lot of people will be disappointed if it's not perfect, and like I just said, I don't think it is. But if you're willing to just enjoy it because it's the characters you love, or you can just detach yourself from that and not expect it to be perfect, you can still enjoy it. There's a lot to enjoy about this movie. I loved it. It was hilarious. Now, that is one of the things about this movie, is that there actually are some jokes that miss, which I think might be the first time I've said that about a Toy Story movie. Maybe in the third one there was a couple of jokes that weren't great. I don't really remember. I haven't rewatched that one as much as the original two, but in the original two, I can't think of a single time where a joke or a plot point seemed out of place. This one, the humor is hit or miss, which is not up to par with the other Toy Stories. So that's something that I wasn't really expecting, something that I was fearing though a little bit about this movie. The Key and Peele characters, they play a bunny and a duck are the two characters, and they might be the best thing about this movie. They might also be the worst thing about this movie. They're either hilarious, or you just kind of roll your eyes and say, wish they weren't in this at all. So it's kind of hit or miss with that, and that's how the whole movie feels. It's very uneven in feeling, especially when you're coming from it as it does kind of feel unnecessary. When you've had this perfect little story, you don't know that you need anything added to it, so why make anything new at all? However, that question is a little bit answered by the ending of this movie, and I'm not going to spoil that yet, but I will talk about that later in the spoilers if you hang around for that. So there's actually a lot of spoilers in this movie. I'm just going to say this now. They have balls. This ending is wild, and if you haven't seen it yet, buckle up because it goes crazy. And if you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. This was so far out of left field, and you know, I give them props for that. It's original. It was original plot. That's something that you could honestly complain about the other Toy Stories, is it's kind of the same plot each time. This one, you could argue that it kind of is, but the ending's definitely different. The ending's definitely unique and something brand new, so you can't make that argument about this. So parts of this honestly are my favorite thing in the whole franchise, and other parts definitely are not. So overall, I would say that it's probably the worst one, or definitely the worst one, but it's not such a steep drop off that you can't enjoy it a lot. Now, there's other things about it though that raise questions. Like we talked about it when I saw the trailer and I had the trailer reaction. A lot of people talked about it. You've got this character named Forky, who's a spork with some pipe cleaner and googly eyes and some things taped on, and it's alive and, you know, animated. Oh, pun. Which raises these questions of what creates life in this universe? What necessitates life? This was just some trash that is now living and thinking and has a soul? Like, how does that work? Also, not all the toys in this movie are that way. There are some toys that are just toys, and it made me question, how does that work at all? Like, there's this one scene where Woody is running through this park and he needs to get away, and he jumps onto this little truck and rides for a few feet and then jumps out and keeps running. And that toy was very obviously not alive. Did not have a personality, no soul, nothing. It was just a toy truck. But we've seen that the RV, just because that was a car, that was still alive. That still had emotions. That still had a personality. So it's not just cars in this universe aren't real. They're just toys. So why aren't some of these toys living? We don't know. They don't really explain it. It's just kind of there. And those are the kind of things that I'm talking about in the rest of the Toy Story trilogy, or movies at this point, franchise. You didn't have these kind of questions because they didn't really bring them up and you didn't have to worry about it. This goes a little bit deeper, but doesn't fulfill all of these questions. There's a lot of these plot points actually where it feels like they're going to do something more with it and they never do. There's another character who, I guess I should talk about this in the spoilers, but you feel like there's an imperfection with this character and you want to see this person get love for their imperfections, and you never see that. And it's like, well, why put that in there if you're not going to actually fulfill that plot line? So that's one issue. Another issue is this doesn't really feel like a story about toys. It's not about all of them, it's about Woody specifically. It doesn't feel like a continuation, it feels like its own separate thing. I think it was supposed to be just like a holiday special or a straight to movie or straight to TV movie, and then got changed into this, and it might have been better to just stay as that, because it doesn't really fit entirely. You've got all of these side characters or main characters becoming side characters, and you say, well, you can't focus on everybody. Yeah, but Buzz Lightyear honestly felt like a side character in this movie. It's honestly just Woody, Forky, and then Bo Peep is also a pretty big role, and there's a couple of new other characters too. But honestly, they push, like Jesse's in this barely at all, Bullseye, all of them, they're barely in it at all. And they just feel like side characters. Like if you hadn't seen the other movies, you would barely even know who they are. You might not. You might forget their name because you barely see them. So that's kind of disappointing. And honestly, yeah, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's a continuation. It just feels like its own separate story. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. There has something to do with the ending that actually talks about that as well. So I'll get more into that in spoilers. But altogether, that's really all I have to say that's not spoiler related, is that this was good, it was enjoyable, but honestly just not really up to the level of the other ones. So if you want your perfect trilogy to stay perfect, you can just ignore this one. But if you want to enjoy this one, there's a lot to enjoy about it. It's definitely not perfect, it's definitely flawed, but man, there's some really cool, interesting things and ideas that they go with that I appreciate it. I still don't know how I feel about it, but I feel like I'm gonna probably end up giving it somewhere around a 7 or 8. It's up there. It's not like a 9 or a 10, but it's definitely not bad. I just don't know how much I'm gonna want to rewatch this or ever. I might not ever watch this again. I don't know. That's the thing about the first two, is those are so rewatchable. The third one I've only seen a couple times, haven't had much of a desire to watch that more. And this one's kind of in that same vein where I enjoyed it, but I might not want to watch this again. So if you haven't seen it yet and you want to, it sounds like it's something that you'd be into, you love your Toy Story characters and you just want to see what they do, then go ahead and see it. I definitely enjoyed myself. I was laughing, I was crying, it moved me, it was a lot of fun. And if you just want to leave it how it was, go for that too. But whatever you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and everything. Thanks, guys. Bye, and on to spoilers. That was an awkward transition, but you know what? We're working with what we got. So, the ending of this movie, like I said, is wild. And if you haven't actually seen it, you're just waiting for me to explain it to you, put your seatbelt on. Because boy, oh boy, this is wild. And I guess I just have to jump into it. So this whole time, Woody is going after Bo Peep, and he's trying to bring her back with him, as well as Forky. He's trying to like bring the whole gang back together, and you end up having him leave the gang. Buzz, Jesse, all of them, Rex, Slinky Dog, he leaves them to go with Bo Peep. No longer with Bonnie, the little girl, and he moves on to whatever he does. Lost Toy. That was not what I was expecting at all. So, I mean, like, I give them props just because, wow, originality, that takes balls. You went in a completely different direction than I was expecting. And there's some really good things and some really frustrating things about this. On the good end, like I said, it's unpredictable, it's great, it shows a level of maturity, it shows that he's moving on, that he's able to go and pursue the things he loves and cares about. And it does make sense because you see it throughout this. There's no real connection between him and Bonnie. There's a little bit, but it's like he's got this loyalty complex, but there's no real relationship there. You never feel about her like you did about Andy. There's no real desire for you to get back to him. During this movie, honestly, in the middle section, there was kind of a lull where I was like, what's the point of this movie? I just don't really care. And it explains it in the ending. Is like, yeah, you weren't really supposed to be that invested in this because there was no real reason to. Here's something to get invested in, though, and that worked for me. Now, the problem with that is it kind of does screw over the original trilogy, and like, that had such a perfect ending, and now this is like, oh, and now we're moving on to something else. And there's good and bad to that as well, because it kind of says like there is no perfect book ending to a story in real life. It just keeps going, and maybe it goes on past what you want it to, but you still have to keep evolving. You have to keep doing what you believe is right, listening to, you know, your heart or your whatever, your inner voice, doing whatever you believe is right and going with that. Even after the perfect ending, you still have life left to live, so live it to its fullest. And that's a good message. I don't know how I feel about that coming from this franchise, and maybe that's just my inner child being annoyed that they're ruining my little perfect story, but that's part of growing up too, and that's something that like I will grasp onto much better than any of those stupid little kids watching in the theater with me all talking about stuff. Although the kid behind me did have a good point. He went, that's a twist? And I was like, yes, it was. But regardless, that's something that me as a 23-year-old man sitting there in the theater can relate to much more than a kid ever could. And it's a strong, powerful message that they're going to grow up to realize is true. And that's a great message. It's something that we have to live with and learn in our lives. So that's a great message. And I feel like that's what Toy Story has always been about. Each one has been about growing up a little bit in a different way. And this has continued that. And it looks different than what we're used to it. But that's part of growing up, is the awkwardness of it, the uncomfortableness of it. And so that's honestly the best thing and only thing they could have done if they wanted to continue this story. So I guess that's good. It's just hard, but you know what? Maybe I'll grow to love this ending. I don't know. I still have to think about it, honestly. But aside from that, there are some other things that I want to talk about too. So I'm glad that I stayed for the credits, because actually that explains so much. So you've got this Forky character, and then another one is made. I don't know that they ever said her name, but it's a knife, so Knifey or something. And she comes in and she's calling herself Trash, just like Forky did at the beginning. And Forky's job is to tell her, no, you're a toy, like Woody did for him. It's like, you're a toy. And she goes, am I alive? How am I alive? And he goes, I don't know. And that like kind of like threw out every question I had. The whole movie I'm going like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. What is the mythos of the toys? Why are they alive? Why does this make any sense? And he just kind of said, I don't know. Like, nobody knows. And that kind of like made me back up and go, Honestly, yeah, that's kind of life. Nobody really knows anything, and we're kind of just all trying to figure out, go with what makes the most sense, and just live life to the fullest. And that's a great way to put it. We don't know, and that's part of growing up, is admitting you don't know everything, and kind of just trying to figure out what you can, and let go of the rest. And that's an awesome message, and kind of had to throw out a lot of my nitpicks because I went, fair enough. I don't know why some cars aren't alive. I don't know why a little toy that you put together becomes living. I don't know, but I don't know anything. I don't know what happens when a toy dies. Maybe that's Toy Story 5. We can talk about that. Apparently they're eternal beings. I don't know. They've been outliving all these kids and going from one to another. When does that end? I don't know. But this is kind of like, hey, don't worry about it. None of us know. We don't understand it. So just kind of go with it and figure it out as you go. And that's a great way to put it, because that's the only way you can put it. So that was a really good answer too. Good ending too. Man, Toy Story with the feels. Making you introspective and all, man. So despite, all the little nitpicks and stuff, this is still very enjoyable. It's not a perfect movie, but there's still a lot to love about this movie, and I did love it. I left with a huge smile on my face. I was laughing out loud multiple times. But yeah, there's definitely things that you wish they did better. Like, I just wish that, my other favorite characters were in this movie more. Like, having Buzz barely in the first half was kind of frustrating, and you barely see any of these other characters. There was this great character introduced that had Mel Brooks' voice, and he had a couple of really good lines in there, and then he was gone forever. But I mean, he was just a brand new character. Keanu Reeves' character was basically just Ken again. He was pointless, didn't need him. I do wish that he had gone through the story more with the doll, the bad guy, if you want to call her that. But because, one, she's kind of the best villain they've had in this franchise, is that she's not actually really a villain. And I guess all of the toys that have been bad guys in this, in some way or another, can relate, where they turned bad because they just wanted to be loved, and they've all gone in different directions with this. But she specifically thinks, I'm not loved because I'm imperfect. And so then she has the desire to become perfect, and her imperfection is that she doesn't have a sound box. Well, she has one, but it doesn't work right. So she's going to take Woody's and use that one instead. And you see that that doesn't work, and she still gets rejected, and that's fine. But I almost wish that, she could have been accepted before that had happened. Like, you could show that she was accepted and loved for her imperfections, rather than be rejected once perfect. But that is a nitpick. They did it that way, and maybe, you know what, maybe that's less predictable. You still knew that it was going to happen once it happened, but if you had asked me at the beginning of her character arc, where's this going to go, I was wrong. So it wasn't going for the easiest way out at all, at any of these points. So good for them for originality, I almost felt like it would have been a better lesson if it was said that way. But honestly, none of these lessons in this movie are spelled out. And good for them. It makes you think, it makes you wonder, and it makes you grow up with this movie. If you're a kid when this movie came out, awesome. That's so cool. You get to grow up and watch this again as an adult and go, wow, they were right. That's so cool. So, yeah, there was definitely some of it that was heavy-handed. They were kind of going out of their way to be a little bit preachy in some areas, much like the other Toy Stories weren't. But that's kind of the modern Pixar, so you kind of have to just roll your eyes and get over it. And that feeds into the fact that this isn't perfect. But overall, the good definitely outweighs the bad, so that's what I thought, at least. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.